June 22nd, 1986, Mexico City. 90,000 people watching. One man, one hand, one moment that would burn itself into the memory of two nations. Forever. But this story doesn't start there. No. This rivalry, this war disguised as football, has roots deeper than most people realize. Roots soaked in politics, blood, pride, and a very real conflict fought with actual bullets. This is the story of England versus Argentina, the most bitter, the most dramatic, the most personal rivalry in the history of football. And I promise you, it's even crazier than you think. To understand this rivalry, we need to go back, way back, to the 1860s. Argentina at that time was a young country, growing, building, and the British were everywhere. British engineers built Argentina's railways. British merchants ran its trade. British settlers filled entire neighborhoods of Buenos Aires. And those British settlers, they brought something with them, something that would change Argentina forever. They brought football. The first football clubs in Argentina were founded by Englishmen. Alumni Athletic Club, one of the earliest powerhouses, was run by a Scottish schoolteacher named Alexander Watson Hutton. The game's rules, its language, its culture, it all came from England. But here's the thing about Argentina. They didn't just adopt the game, they transformed it. They made it their own. And within a few decades, football wasn't just a British import anymore. It was the beating heart of Argentine identity. And when the student starts to rival the teacher, that's when things get complicated. July 23rd, 1966. Wembley Stadium, London. The World Cup quarterfinal. England versus Argentina. And this is where the hatred truly begins. The match was brutal. Argentina came in physical, tactical, and determined to frustrate England on their home soil. But the game turned on one moment. Argentine captain Antonio Ratin, a towering 6'2" midfielder, was shown a red card by the German referee Rudolf Kreitlein. The official reason? Ratin was cautioned for a foul and then sent off for what the referee called violence of the tongue. In other words, he was expelled for the look on his face. Ratin refused to leave. For nearly 10 minutes, he stood on the pitch, arguing, gesturing, refusing to accept the decision. He later said he was simply asking for an interpreter because the referee didn't speak Spanish. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. When he finally walked off, Ratin did something that would become legendary. He sat down on the red carpet reserved for the Queen and crumpled a small corner Union Jack pennant in his hands. England won the match 1-0. Geoff Hurst scored. But the real story was what happened after the game. England's manager, Sir Alf Ramsey, physically stopped his own player, George Cohen, from swapping shirts with an Argentine opponent. And then, in a post-match interview, Ramsey uttered a word that Argentina would never forget. He called the Argentine players animals. That single word, animales, detonated like a bomb in Buenos Aires. It was printed on every front page. It was repeated in every bar, every living room, every schoolyard. It wasn't just an insult to 11 players. It was an insult to an entire nation. And Argentina would remember. England went on to win that World Cup, their only one. And in the years that followed, the Argentine press, public, and football itself carried this wound like a scar that refused to heal. They believed the tournament had been rigged against them, that the referee had been biased, that England had cheated their way to glory. And then, 16 years later, something happened that had nothing to do with football at all, but would pour gasoline on an already raging fire. April 2nd, 1982. Argentine military forces invaded the Falkland Islands, a remote British territory in the South Atlantic. Argentina calls them Las Malvinas, and considers them stolen land, taken by the British in 1833. Britain's Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, dispatched a naval task force 8,000 miles across the ocean. What followed was a 74-day war, with real casualties. 649 Argentine soldiers died. 255 British soldiers died. 3 Falkland Island civilians were killed. The war ended with a British victory. Argentina surrendered on June 14, 1982. The political ramifications were enormous. In Argentina, the military junta that had launched the invasion collapsed. In Britain, Thatcher's popularity surged. But for the people of both nations, ordinary people, families who lost sons and brothers, the Falklands War left wounds that cut far deeper than politics. And when these two countries met on a football pitch again, 4 years after the war ended, Argentina and England were drawn into the same group stage bracket at the 1986 World Cup in Mexico. And fate, cruel, poetic, inevitable fate, put them on a collision course in the quarterfinals. What happened next would produce two of the most famous moments in history. June 22nd, 1986. The Estadio Azteca, Mexico City. Temperature, 90 degrees. Altitude, 7,300 feet. And the atmosphere? Volcanic. This wasn't just a football match. Everyone knew it. The English fans knew it. The Argentine fans knew it. The players knew it. The ghost of the Falklands hung over that stadium like a storm cloud. The first half ended 0-0. Tight. Tense. Neither side willing to blink. And then, 6 minutes into the second half, the world changed. Steve Hodge, England's midfielder, tries to clear the ball. He mishits it. The ball floats, slowly, almost in slow motion, back toward the English goal. Shilton comes out. And so does a small man in a blue number 10 shirt. Diego Armando Maradona. Shilton jumped. Maradona jumped. But Maradona was 5'5". Shilton was 6'1". And somehow, Maradona got to the ball first. Because he didn't use his head, he used his hand. His left fist rose above Shilton's gloves and punched the ball into the net. The English players erupted. They surrounded the referee, the Tunisian Ali bin Nasser. They pointed at their hands. They screamed. They begged. But there was no video replay technology in 1986. The referee hadn't seen it. The linesman hadn't seen it. The goal stood. After the match, a reporter asked Maradona how the goal was scored, and Maradona, with a smile that was equal parts mischief and defiance, gave an answer that would echo through eternity. A little with the head of Maradona, and a little with the hand of God. But here's the thing that makes this story truly extraordinary. If that's all that happened, if the hand of God was the only goal Maradona scored that day, this would be a story about cheating, about injustice, about controversy. But 4 minutes later, just 4 minutes, Diego Maradona did something that no one, before or since, has ever done on a football pitch. He picks up the ball in his own half, 10 yards inside Argentine territory, and he starts to run. He beats Peter Beardsley. He beats Peter Reed. He glides past Terry Butcher. He destroys Terry Fenwick. He leaves another defender in his wake. The goalkeeper rushes out, Shilton again, and Maradona drags the ball around him and slides it into the empty net. 60 yards, 6 English players beaten, 10.6 seconds from start to finish. It was immediately called the goal of the century, and nearly 40 years later, no one has seriously challenged that title. In the space of 4 minutes, one man had committed the greatest act of cheating and scored the greatest goal in World Cup history. In the same game, against the same opponent. It was, and remains, the most extraordinary 4-minute stretch in the history of sport. Gary Lineker pulled one back for England to make it 2-1, but it wasn't enough. Argentina won. They would go on to win the entire World Cup. And Maradona? Maradona became immortal. But for England? This was 1966 all over again. Another World Cup, another quarterfinal, another feeling of injustice, another scar. In Argentina, the hand of God wasn't seen as cheating. It was seen as revenge. Revenge for 1966. Revenge for Ratin. Revenge for being called animals. Revenge for the Falklands. Maradona himself later admitted as much. He said scoring that goal against England, with his hand, felt like picking the pocket of an Englishman. And that, right there, is what makes this rivalry different from any other in football. It's not just about sport. It's about history. It's about identity. It's about two nations that are forever entangled and can never, ever let go. 12 years passed. A new generation. New players, new faces, but the same old hatred. June 30th, 1998. The World Cup in France. Round of 16. England versus Argentina. Again. By this point, the rivalry had become the most anticipated fixture in world football. And this match, delivered beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Gabriel Batistuta opens the scoring with a penalty for Argentina. Alan Shearer equalizes from the spot for England. And then an 18-year-old boy, a teenager, does something that makes the entire world sit up. Michael Owen picks up the ball on the halfway line, burns past 2 defenders, and lashes it into the top corner. It was a goal that announced a superstar. 2-1 to England. Then, just before halftime, Javier Zanetti curls in a free kick to make it 2-2. The second half, the tension, then the incident. And then came the moment that would define one man's career. The 47th minute. Diego Simeone, future manager of Atletico Madrid, fouls David Beckham from behind. It's a hard, cynical challenge. Beckham goes down, and then, lying on the ground, Beckham flicks his right leg backward and kicks Simeone. It was petulant. It was foolish. It was barely a kick, more of a flick. But Simeone went down like he'd been shot by a sniper, and the Danish referee, Kim Milton Nielsen, reached into his pocket and pulled out a red card. David Beckham, 23 years old, was sent off. Beckham walking off the pitch, head down, the long, lonely walk. England fought with 10 men. They fought heroically. The game went to penalties. And England, as England so often do, lost on penalties. David Batty and Paul Ince both missed. Argentina celebrated. England was devastated. And the country needed someone to blame. The British tabloid press turned on Beckham with a savagery that was genuinely shocking. The Daily Mirror printed a dartboard with his face on it. Effigies of Beckham were hanged and burned outside pubs. He received death threats for years. Simeone later admitted he deliberately tried to get Beckham sent off. He said he made the most of the contact. He grinned when he said it. This was England versus Argentina. Nothing was ever clean, nothing was ever simple, and nothing was ever forgotten. 4 years of abuse. 4 years of being the most hated man in England. 4 years of carrying the weight of an entire nation's disappointment on his shoulders. And then, June 7th, 2002, World Cup in Japan. England versus Argentina. And David Beckham was the captain. You couldn't write it. You genuinely couldn't write it. The match. Physical. Tense. A penalty is awarded to England. In the 44th minute, Michael Owen is fouled inside the Argentine penalty area. The referee points to the spot, and the man who steps up is David Beckham. Silence. The weight of 4 years in his eyes. He places the ball. He steps back. He looks at the goalkeeper, and he strikes it. Goal. Bottom right corner. The net billows. Beckham wheels away, fists clenched, screaming. 4 years of pain. 4 years of hatred. 4 years of being told he wasn't good enough. All of it, released in one swing of his right foot. England won the match 1-0. It was the first time England had beaten Argentina since 1966. And for Beckham, it was the most complete redemption story football has ever seen. Relief, joy, vindication. England and Argentina haven't met at a World Cup since 2002. They played friendlies in neutral ground. Something had shifted. Diego Armando Maradona passed away on November 25th, 2020. He was 60 years old. In England, even those who had hated him for decades paused to acknowledge what he was, a flawed, complicated, magnificent genius. Gary Lineker, the man who scored against Maradona that day in Mexico City, called him by some distance the best player of my generation, and arguably the greatest of all time. Football has a way of doing that. Respect. This rivalry was built on a century of entanglement, a divine hand, a celestial goal, a petulant kick, a penalty that healed a nation. It is the story of how football can become so much more than a game, how it can carry the weight of history, of war, of national pride, of personal redemption. England and Argentina. They will meet again, someday, on some pitch, in some tournament that hasn't been invented yet. And when they do, none of this will be forgotten. Because in football, as in life, the deepest wounds leave the deepest scars, and the deepest scars tell the best stories. 649 Argentine and 255 British soldiers lost their lives in the Falklands War. This video is dedicated to their memory. If this story gave you chills, hit that subscribe button. I cover the greatest stories in football history, the ones your school never taught you. Drop a comment below. Hand of God, genius, or cheating? I'll see you in the next one.